Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Tuesday, January 15th, 2019. Still trying to be careful with the dates. It's the 15th. I got that part right anyway. It's a snow delay day here in our little corner of the world. No more snow than we had yesterday. Less, in fact, I would imagine. Streets not yet entirely clear. A lot of freeze over, cold morning, et cetera, et cetera. And so, of course, the worst possible combination for our morning activities here in the Kagro in the Morning World headquarters. There will be kids entering, exiting, and packing up for the day all throughout the show, so I hope you're ready for those fun segments. It is Tuesday, so we're without diversion from either Greg Dworkin or Joan McCarter, both of whom will be with us tomorrow. And we'll see. Maybe we can pull in Armando on a freelance basis to see if he wants to chat us up a little bit. There's plenty happening, of course. If not, okay, so we'll all take a little pause and we'll talk about something, and I will mute the microphone briefly and shout at children to leave the house and make their way to the bus. So that's the exciting world inside of the headquarters. Outside, the President of the United States is a Russian asset, and I don't know, and also a consumer of thousands of hamburgers, apparently, this morning. I don't care too much about typos like that. I make them all the time, although, I don't know, hamburgers. How do you even, is that, I guess that's not too far off the mark. D and G aren't too far apart in the keyboard, but there is the F key in between them. I don't know exactly how he made that error, but hey, it happens. We'll catch up with that and, probably a few other items on our agenda as well. And in between, we'll pack lunches and make sure everybody's got their water bottles and are correctly timing their departures. We're in a 2-hour delay, which puts us right smack in the middle of the proceedings today. But no news there. I think you all know the drill by now, actually. Probably not going to cause too much difficulty. Let's see. All right, let's get our morning tweet sent out. And if you want to know what's going on this morning, it's always wise to check with Bill in Portland, Maine. He usually knows what I'm doing. And here's what we got. Let's see. Daily Coast Radio is live now. That's good. Caution. Kagro X, that's me. Hi, how are you? Says the fumes from yesterday's White House fast food orgy may waft through your speakers. I think it'll be wafting through everything for quite a while. Pretty much a worldwide stench at this point, and I'm not certain that's the hamburgers, but it's I have noticed before in picking up a McDonald's order or something, just driving home with a takeout, a drive-through window order to bring home for the kids. The next day, the car smells like bad McDonald's. McDonald's, fast food in general, I think, is something that to the extent that it smells good ever, it smells good hot and fresh, and cold the next day or even cold a few minutes later, it doesn't smell all that good. And I have my concerns about how what's lingering in the White House state dining room today. Anyway, yesterday more of just a, oh gosh, eye-rolling embarrassment as usual in the White House. I don't think there's anybody that really alleges that there's any kind of scandal growing out of this, unless, of course, you read the statement wherein Donald Trump insisted that he paid for the fast food, which of course means he did not pay for the fast food, which is a lie, so therefore would possibly develop into scandal, I suppose, although it's the lowest on the totem pole as far as I think anybody we know would see it. Congratulations, I guess, to Clemson on getting a fantastic meal of fast food. I guess on a certain level, it's a nice-ish thing to do. Okay, there's a government shutdown, and you want to have the national championship team come. You could say come, next month when we're back up and running, if we're back up and running. And I guess at some point you have to admit that this could go on for some time, so you want to have them in. And you want to put on something for them, and you don't have a kitchen staff, presumably, that can put together a meal that large, although I think most of the White House staff you could probably get them in on an emergency basis, but why bother? Don't make them work for no pay. We'll bring in some, I wouldn't mind having a pizza party out of it, although he did buy the worst food, just generally speaking. And he did manage to truck in some pizza as well. A lot of people said, I don't see the pizzas in the photos. They were there, Domino's, of course, and, nobody can get too excited about that. But, it was a nice thing to do. The team kind of maybe, sort of, I assume they actually wanted to go. The players, I have no idea. But you go, it's an event, it's part of being on the championship team, and the president makes a minimal effort to make it something certainly memorable. They were part of an historic occasion. I did wonder a little bit about, he was certain that this was probably some of their favorite foods or whatever, however he put it. And my guess is that they're used to eating a little better than that. I mean, like, nutrition is a big deal now for top level athletes. And, they're fair enough. They're done, right? They won a national championship. I think it's time for them to have a burger if they want it. But on the other hand, when he was outsourcing the food, he owns a steakhouse nearby that I'm sure he even at least thinks that it makes pretty good food. And since he was paying anyway, and he's a bazillionaire, supposedly, like there could have been some nice steaks involved or something. But instead, what can I tell you? What is hamburger? Chopped ham? No, it's chopped steak. And what goes better with chopped steak than silver platters full of chicken dipping sauce? I can't help you with that. But anyway, it was quite a sight, and we'll all remember it for many years to come and tell our children and our children's children about the day that the White House silver was set out for McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King's, and maybe some pizzas. I don't think I saw any Burger King make it to the table, by the way. Not sure why that would have happened, but do you want to speculate on whether or not the food was donated, or he made somebody else pay and said, I'll pay you back, and then he's not gonna? At least we could have some fun with an otherwise kind of boring event. All right. I know there's more important news out here somewhere. I'll look in Pocket to see if I can find any. Yes, here's some. Steve King was removed from his committee assignments over his white supremacy remark. This, according to reporting from the New York Times and Reality as well. Both of those things would have carried those stories. Real life, you can look it up. It happened. And the New York Times also reported it as well. Look at this picture of him headed somewhere and trying to ignore the press. And how interesting. So he's carrying a bottle of water, and there's a young woman next to him, maybe a staffer, carrying a coffee, but I can't tell from the picture whether it's his coffee or hers. And then a dude walking on the other side of him in something of I guess the flash of the camera has illuminated his jacket, but he's wearing quite a brilliant blue blazer and khaki pants as well, so fashionably dressed for the intern set. And congratulations to Congress there for removing Steve King from his committee assignments. Yes, that is one of the punishments that can be brought to bear on him, and it's an easy enough thing to do if you can get, when you get Republican agreement to it. It's very simple, and apparently it was the Republican conference that voted to strip him of his committee assignments. I don't know how many of the committee assignments had already actually been made, or whether they're still in the process, given that it's fairly early in the new Congress. They may not have set committee rosters altogether, which would make it even easier to remove him and replace him with someone else on his various committee assignments. So let's see. Tripp Gabriel, Jonathan Martin, and Nicholas Vandos teamed up for the New York Times piece on it. Let's see what they have to say about the politics and process, and comment right along with them. House Republican leaders removed Representative Steve King of Iowa from the Judiciary and Agriculture committees on Monday. Presumably that is the sum total of his assignments. on Monday night as party officials scrambled to appear tough on racism. We need to appear tough on racism. How can we do that? I know, get them off the Agriculture Committee. Okay. And contain damage from comments Mr. King made to the New York Times questioning why white supremacy is considered offensive. The punishment came on a day when Mr. King was denounced by an array of Republican leaders, though not President Trump. He maintains he's not familiar with the comments because he doesn't watch the telly news. The Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, suggested Mr. King, quote, find another line of work. And Senator Mitt Romney, I don't know why they talked to that guy, said he should quit. And House Republicans, in an attempt to be proactive, stripped him of the committee seats in the face of multiple Democratic resolutions to censure Mr. King that are being introduced this week. So, yeah, it'll be a bit of a scramble as to whose resolution did they let through, and is Nancy Pelosi or are others in the Democratic leadership who would together could make a decision about who would be recognized to move such a resolution. They could leave that up to the Republicans and let them clean their own house, or I don't know. It may also be that they want the publicity of being the ones to enforce discipline themselves. And I think I saw last night reference to, I don't remember who it was, but it was a Democratic member whose resolution might in fact be the one that moves first. I'm a little bit surprised that they didn't want to let this one go to the Republicans. But I don't know how strategic it really is, or whether Republicans really do themselves any good by taking care of the censure resolution on their own as well. But perhaps there's some perception that that's the case. Anyway, those measures would force Republicans to take a stand on the House Democratic majority's attempt to publicly reprimand one of their own. Well, not one of their own, but you know what I mean. By member of Congress, they mean one of their own. Mr. King, who has been an ally of President Trump on the border wall and other issues, has a long history of making racist remarks and insults about immigrants, but has not drawn rebukes from Republican leaders until recently. In November, two top Iowa Republicans like Senator Chuck Grassley, what? Is it like Chuck Grassley? Two Iowa Republicans like Senator Charles E. Grassley endorsed Mr. King for election. Who are these two top Iowa Republicans who are like them? I assume that like is a stray. Oh, okay. I see. Not two top Iowa, but top Iowa Republicans like Senator Grassley. I see. There are no others. It's just that he is one, and others like him, and although really nobody likes him, endorsed Mr. King for re-election even after one one Republican, House Republican came out and denounced him as a white supremacist. Now I see why I'm doing this. They're stacked up, these words, white and House, as in House of Representatives. No, House Republican officials came out and denounced him as a white supremacist. It's not a White House thing. It's just a house and some people who are white. Okay. In an interview with the Times published last week, Mr. King said, white nationalist, white supremacist, Western civilization, how did that language become offensive? And the answer was violent racism. Speaking to reporters on Monday night after the House Republican leadership team acted, Representative Kevin McCarthy of California, the minority leader, said he was not ruling out supporting a censure or reprimand resolution against Mr. King. He said the Republicans are not removing Mr. King from the GOP House conference itself, so he can still attend its party meetings and tell them how to be racist. And it was up to Iowans whether Mr. King should stay in office. This is not the first time we've heard these comments, Mr. McCarthy said of Mr. King, an acknowledgement of the racist language the congressman has used before. That's good. I'm glad he acknowledges it. That is not the party of Lincoln. Yes, it is. And it's definitely not American. Mr. McCarthy, who conferred privately with Mr. King for an hour before the vote, did not say why the most recent comments were a breaking point, given Mr. King's long public record of similar remarks. Maybe I did not see those, but I disagree with these. Okay, whatever. The full Republican conference must still technically ratify the leader's decision, but Mr. McCarthy presented the matter as closed, and I'm sure it probably is, and it's something they don't really want to spend a great deal of time actually deciding. They'd rather just have that handed down from leadership in most cases. Mr. King remained defiant after losing his committee seats, releasing a long statement insisting that his comments in the Times article had been misunderstood. He said he'd been referring only to Western civilization when he asked, how did that language become offensive? Not white nationalist or white supremacist, which he said for no apparent reason, I guess. They just, I don't know, I opened my mouth and these words came out. It's weird. Leader McCarthy's decision to remove me from the committees is a political decision that ignores the truth, he said. He told Mr. McCarthy, you have to do what you have to do, and I will do what I have to do. Wow, that's insightful. He pledged to continue to, quote, point out the truth, unquote, and serve his district for at least the next 2 years. The push to condemn Mr. King illustrated how alarmed senior Republicans are about the party's image just 2 months after they lost 40 House seats. Hello. Most of them in suburban or diverse districts, including 7 in Mr. McCarthy's home state of California, where the GOP is on the brink of extinction. The condemnations of Mr. King stood in stark contrast to the lawmakers' willingness to tolerate President Trump's frequent offensive and insensitive remarks about migrants, black people, Native Americans, and other minorities. Just last week, the president used the Oval Office to unleash a blistering assault on undocumented immigrants, portraying them as criminals in a fashion that harked back to an earlier era of American politics, which one was racist, but rarely heard from a president in modern times. And on Sunday night, Mr. Trump invoked the Wounded Knee Massacre, of hundreds of Native Americans as an attempt to joke about Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. Ha ha ha, mass death. Hilarious. I am glad they are finally taking action after all these years of Steve King slandering immigrants and Hispanics. But the President of the United States is also doing that, and he just said something about Elizabeth Warren a few evenings ago that was also racially ugly, and we haven't heard a word of condemnation from anyone in the Republican Party about that, said Representative Joaquin Castro, a Democrat of Texas. All right. Congressional Republicans have continued to embrace the president and his hardline immigration politics. That's a good way of putting it. Averting their gaze from his inflammatory rhetoric, out of fear their core voters will punish them if they stray from Mr. Trump. Though there are fewer and fewer of them, but I guess if you got a lot of evangelicals, you should be worried. The president, when asked by reporters on Monday about Mr. King's remarks, said, I haven't been following it. Republicans are now trying to get ahead of a fast-moving political problem while the country is in the midst of a lengthy government shutdown over a border wall by President Trump, who in many ways patterned his immigration policies and rhetoric on those of Mr. King. This is making nice connections here. Good work here, fellas. Mr. McCarthy called a special meeting of the Republican Steering Committee to remove Mr. King from judiciary. A little bit of process note there. How do you do this? The Steering Committee, which has jurisdiction. They removed him from judiciary, which has jurisdiction over immigration, voting rights, and impeachment, by the way, and agriculture, which is a prized committee for Iowans. Mr. King also lost his seat on the Small Business Committee. Throw that in there. Prized by no one. The steering committee vote was unanimous. While Republican officials quickly turned on Mr. King, the party also came in for criticism from the Senate's lone black Republican, Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. He noted that the GOP, although I forget to call it the GOP every once in a while, as I like to do, has long remained silent in the face of racist comments. Some in our party wonder why Republicans are constantly accused of racism. It is because of our silence when things like this are said, Mr. Scott wrote in a Washington Post opinion column. Well, that and it's because you guys keep saying those things, but okay. It's not clear what, if any, additional steps congressional Republican leaders will take with Mr. King. The National Republican Congressional Committee indicated Monday that they were not ready to step away from him. The NRCC does not get involved in primaries. That's not really what you're being asked here. and isn't going to comment on a hypothetical general election 2 years away, said Chris Pack, a spokesman for the House campaign arm. Democrats are moving to censure or reprimand the Iowa congressman, a stinging penalty. Meh. Among them were Representative James Clyburn, also of South Carolina, the highest-ranking African-American in Congress, who introduced a measure Monday night in the form of a resolution of disapproval of Mr. King's comments and white nationalism. By the way, highest-ranking African-American in Congress because he is the majority whip. That's his position. The Democratic leaders in the House have yet to say what they will do with the competing censure resolutions, but they are inclined to allow a vote of some sort related to Mr. King's remarks, according to one senior Democratic aide. In the interview with The Times, Mr. King also reflected on the record number of minorities and women in the new Democratic-controlled House. You could look over there and think the Democratic Party is no country for white men, he said. Okay, that's really pretty clear. I gotcha. Mr. King's hardline immigration policies and demeaning comments about Hispanics foreshadowed Mr. Trump's nativist rhetoric in his 2016 campaign, in his 2 years in the White House, and during the government shutdown over a border wall. The president once boasted to Mr. King that he raised more money for him than anyone else. I mean, I think he's probably boasted that to everybody he's spoken with, but okay. That was recalled by Mr. King in the Times article, which traced how the Iowa congressman helped write the playbook for white identity politics that dominate the Republican Party under Mr. Trump. Yes. He has already drawn one serious primary opponent, State Senator Randy Feenstra, for the 2020 campaign, and some high-profile Republicans have indicated they will not embrace his reelection. It does open the door for other individuals to take a look. Governor Kim Reynolds of Iowa said in a television interview last week of Mr. King's closer-than-expected victory last year. Ms. Reynolds said she was staying out of the primary right now. That's the New York Times for you, Ms. Reynolds. You couldn't say Governor Reynolds, but okay. Said she was staying out of the primary right now, but multiple Iowa Republicans said the state's senior elected officials were unlikely to endorse Mr. King again and would wait until there is more clarity in the primary field before rallying to one of his GOP challengers. Other western Iowa Republicans are expected to challenge Mr. King, who has fended off primaries before, but did so with the support of his party and its top leaders. Who was challenging him before, I wonder, without party support? Okay. In addition to Ms. Reynolds' criticism, I wonder if he was being primaried from the right. Is that possible? In addition to Ms. Reynolds' criticism, Iowa Republican Chair Jeff Kaufman said the state party would remain neutral in Mr. King's primary. That doesn't really mean too much. Also, Iowa's two Republican senators, Mr. Grassley and Joni Ernst, along with Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, who had appointed Mr. King a co-chairman of his 2016 presidential campaign, all rebuked Mr. King in recent days. All had eagerly embraced him in the past because of his standing with the state's most conservative voters, keys to winning statewide elections in Iowa, which holds, of course, the first-in-the-nation presidential nominating contest, and shouldn't anymore. Mr. Grassley had endorsed Mr. King in November for re-election, even after the chairman of the House Republican Election Committee denounced Mr. King as a white supremacist. Iowa needs Steve King in Congress, Mr. Grassley said in that endorsement. Pardon me. I also need Steve King in Congress. Well, that should be held against you. Absolutely. Ms. Ernst, who faces re-election in 2020, appeared with Mr. King at a rally in his district the Monday before Election Day last year, after he had endorsed a Toronto mayoral candidate with neo-Nazi ties. And I'm afraid that's going to have to be held against you, Ms. Ernst, as well. Good reminders from our reporters here to take away from the Steve King story. And please, take away the Steve King story. No word from that, but I did see elsewhere, I don't think I put aside who was working on the resolution, but I did see, I got some messages yesterday from a couple of you, and Greg was among them, and I should go and see. There we are. There is some news on the process and who's doing what here. How far back do I have to scroll to get the whole story? Here we are. Let's see. Yesterday evening, Greg sent me this tweet from Mike DeBonis, who is who? Mike, who are you? You want to tell us? Covers the Congress for the Washington Post. You'd think I would know that name by now then. News per one Dem aide, he says, the plan is to vote tomorrow, that'd be today, Tuesday, on a disapproval resolution against Steve King, similar to what was done when Congressman Joe Wilson, remember him, shouted out, "You lie," at Obama during the State of the Union. Not a lot of Dems happy about this disapproval plan, he says in a second tweet. Rush and Ryan both proceeding with privileged censure revolution. Okay. And the CBC chair, is this right? Yeah. Congressional Black Caucus chair, Congresswoman Karen Bass has what to say here. Wants the Republicans to remove King from the conference as well as from his committee assignments. So, yeah, they're probably not about to do that, but well, that makes it effective to call for it, something they can't live up to. And so, okay, Democrats, I guess, certainly in the absence of any action on a censure-type resolution from Republicans, will not hesitate to think about bringing their own. And, of course, as I mentioned to you yesterday, those would be questions of the privileges of the House and therefore privileged in their consideration. And we can talk a little bit about the actual process under which that might happen. And I think we can do it relatively quickly, but we'll have to wait to do it for after the break because 7 seconds is not nearly enough to describe it to you even briefly. So we'll be right back. Please hang on. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Things moving along apace here on our snow delay day. We've got at least one lunch packed during that break. And let's see, next break it'll be time to shake the other son awake and shuffle the first out the door. So just keeping you up with our schedule here in the headquarters so that you know exactly what's going on. Let's see. Okay, I think I'll take a look at that one. Empty Wheel tweeting a little bit about the Trump-Russia situation, which is, a little bit in the news today. So we'll put that one aside and see if we can chime in on that one later on. But first, process. I told you that Greg sent us a couple of notes about this. The second set of tweets that he sent are, let's see, this one here from Laura Baron Lopez. And who is Laura? I'll tell you. If she'll tell us, I'll tell you. Politico, national political reporter, covering House campaigns in 2020. All right. Laura says, a new story here. This was new yesterday at 7 p.m. Anyway, Tim Ryan. It'll be Tim Ryan will stand up and provide official notice of his introduction of a motion to censure Steve King right after votes. I guess so. After the main House business of the day is finished, he will, at the end of the day, introduce a motion to censure Steve King. That starts a 2-day clock, after which the resolution becomes privileged. I see what you mean, and available to be brought up for a vote. Ohio Republican Dave Joyce is a co-sponsor, so that's also an interesting process note. Yeah. Okay. So as I understand the process, one, you would make a motion to consider a resolution addressing the privileges of the House. There's probably not going to be much in the way of of contesting whether or not the resolution actually poses a question of the privileges of the House. That is open to debate. The fact that someone other than the majority leader or minority leader is offering the resolution means that you have 2 days from its recognition as properly posing a question of the privileges of the House to schedule it for floor action. I don't know if it's a 2-day clock that has to run out, or I think it's just a cap on the amount of time that the leadership can delay before being forced under the rules anyway to consider a privileged resolution like this. So, okay, so if he starts that today's Tuesday, they should be able to finish it up before adjourning for the week, which usually comes on Thursday. So we should have an outcome of that vote before the week is out. So, all right, I think that brings us up to speed on this. There's a connected tweet here from another Politico reporter, John Bresnahan. It looks like it's one of two here. So let's see if we can. Does he have his first one connected? I guess not. Lots happening on King right now. GOP leaders meeting right now. That would have been yesterday. And make strip May. Oh, I guess that's supposed to be May strip King of some or all of his committee assignments. That much we know already. And James Clyburn, Whip Clyburn on Twitter, expected to speak on the House floor soon on King. So that would have happened already, and I've missed it. How do you know? What do you know? All right. So that brings us up to speed on what happens with Steve King and how it will happen. And let's see. Definitely a couple other things in the pipeline here that deserve some consideration. And I'm trying to think in my head while I'm on the run here how to schedule their discussion. Let's go, first of all, back over to some of my open tabs here and Pocket to see what I've got here. See if what Empty Wheel sent seems intriguing enough to head down that road. Compromise. Sally Yates's warning about vulnerability to blackmail applied to Trump even more than Mike Flynn, who is a notorious spy. And so it seems interesting to note that it might have applied more to Trump, although I can easily see how, than Mike Flynn. What are you talking about, Marcy? Let's see if we can find out. Given the news that the FBI opened a counterintelligence investigation into Trump in the week after he fired Jim Comey on May 9th, 2017. And here, if you're following her notes, she says CNN's account is far more useful than the New York Times is. I want to look at part of what Sally Yates testified, remember her, the day before Trump fired Comey, that she told Don McGahn, remember that guy, when she let him know that Mike Flynn had lied to the public and the FBI about what he said to Sergei Kislyak on December 9th, 2016. Effectively, Yates laid out how, because the Russians would have known that Flynn had lied, it would be easy to blackmail him. And let's see, this is a quote from, what, is that from her testimony? We were concerned that the American people had been misled about the underlying conduct and what General Flynn had done. And additionally, that we weren't the only ones that knew all of this, that the Russians also knew about what General Flynn had done. And the Russians also knew that General Flynn had misled the vice president and others, because in the media accounts, it was clear from the vice president and others that they were repeating what General Flynn had told them. And that this was a problem because not only did we believe that the Russians knew this, but that they likely had proof of this information. And that created a compromise situation. I see. That compromise, that kind. A situation where the national security advisor essentially could be blackmailed by the Russians, on top of being a spy for who knows who. Finally, we told them that we were giving them all this information so that they could take action, the action that they deemed appropriate. Of course, it took them a little while to come around to that, didn't it? At the time she delivered those comments to McGahn in January of 2017, Yates would have known only that Flynn had lied. Marcy is telling us, even at the time she testified about the exchange with McGahn in May, neither she nor the FBI would yet have had tangible evidence that Flynn had been acting on Trump's orders when he told Kislyak to hold off on responding to sanctions. Likewise, neither she nor the FBI knew at the time that Trump's spawn, I guess Don Jr. here, had the summer before agreed to consider lifting sanctions if his dad got elected. Neither Yates nor the FBI would have known that the Russians were offering a Trump Tower deal and dirt on Hillary Clinton to induce Don Jr. to commit to revisit sanctions. And neither Yates nor the FBI would have known that Don McGahn had written up a misleading report justifying the firing of Mike Flynn, who, after all, had only done what he had been ordered. That's a great excuse. That directly conflicted with Yates's account of the conversation. For all those reasons, Yates would not have known that this theory, that covering up the Tower for Sanctions quid pro quo, the commitment to deliver on sanctions relief, and the bogus reason for firing Mike Flynn made a person susceptible to blackmail, actually applied to Trump, not just Flynn. Indeed, for a variety of reasons, Trump was more susceptible to blackmail than Flynn, because Flynn had just been doing what he was told, didn't have a prior bribe to hide, and might expect a pardon if he successfully protected the president. Interesting retelling of the story here. Indeed, Yates would not know how, from the moment David Ignatius revealed that the FBI had discovered the transcripts of Flynn's conversations with Sergei Kislyak, the Russians would have had Trump by, as she says, by the nuts. I think we can say that. We're just talking about nuts, after all. All the more so, given that the FBI also had a transcript of Kislyak explicitly informing Flynn that Putin had based his response to Obama's sanctions on December 30th, 2016, on Flynn's assurances about sanctions. Putin, that old KGB hand, made sure there was a record of the Russians, making it clear that their response was entirely premised on whatever promises Flynn had made at Trump's direction. From the moment the Russians learned the FBI had found those transcripts, Trump would have had to prevent the FBI from discovering that he had ordered Flynn to make those comments and had ordered him to do so to pay off his election debt. From that moment forward, Trump would be stuck committing one after another act of obstruction in an attempt to prevent the FBI from discovering the full truth. Each of those acts would put him deeper in the hole, because each time he engaged in obstruction, the Russians would measure his increasing vulnerability. Almost a month before he took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, Donald Trump clandestinely took an action to undercut the official policy of America's president, the actual one at the time, being Barack Obama. From that moment forward, he had as much, how did she want to say? Did she want to say as much at stake or as much of a stake? Because it says as much as stake. Let's guess that's as much at stake as the Russians in thwarting the investigation into the election year operation. Well, more, I think, at stake than the Russians. The Russians didn't want to be caught, but then again, if they were, so what? They don't live here. They're not subject to our laws, and nobody in Russia goes to jail over that. However, here in the United States, it's a little bit different if you're the people involved. But I get the point. Okay, so, and Putin has capitalized on that compromise ever since, is the exciting conclusion of Marcy's piece here. Okay, very interesting. And like I said, the other day when we were watching people awaken to the possibility that maybe the collusion story and the obstruction stories weren't separate after all. Gee whiz. That pretty much lays it out. Of course they were one and the same. It doesn't make any sense any other way, really. All right. Let's see. Speaking of all of this, perhaps we could go take a moment to read this piece from the Washington Post. We might as well take things to their most exciting and extreme conclusion. A piece ran yesterday from Elizabeth Holtzman in the Washington Post. I was in Congress during Nixon's impeachment proceedings. Yes, we remember. William Barr is wrong. William Barr. We can talk about William Barr because he's supposedly the incoming, he's the designee anyway, as not acting but ordinary, regular, everyday Attorney General. And Elizabeth Holtzman, well familiar with her discussion of impeachment. She made her positions clear and told us the same story, and we were glad she did, during the George W. Bush administration and back again. So it's good to have some institutional memory around. Elizabeth Holtzman, we're reminded in this editorial comment at the top of the piece, was a Democratic member of the House Judiciary Committee during Watergate and is author of The Case for Impeaching Trump. I believe she also was author of The Case for Impeaching George W. Bush as well. So a prolific author thanks to Republican recidivism. Good news. For her bank account anyway, and I'm glad she's able to be here to share this institutional memory with us. William P. Barr will appear Tuesday, that's now today, so take note of that, before the Senate Judiciary Committee at his confirmation hearings for Attorney General. Something else we might as well have mentioned, where he will face strong questioning. Oh, good. I'm glad it's going to be strong. About a 19-page memo that attacks the legal basis of Special Counsel Robert S. Mueller III's investigation. Okay. Those questions will correctly focus on Barr's extravagant and absurd assertions of limitless, or what Barr calls illimitable. I kind of like that as a word, illimitable, executive power. As a concept, I don't like that, but I like the word illimitable. But there is another fatal flaw in Barr's memo that casts grave doubt on his scholarship and his veracity. He misrepresents key facts of the impeachment proceedings against Richard Nixon in 1974 in order to limit the grounds for prosecuting President Trump. As a member of the House Judiciary Committee, I was a witness to that history, and I know that Barr is not accurate. Barr claims in his memo that presidents can't be prosecuted for obstruction of justice on a basis of acts that don't strictly involve impairment of evidence. Only inherently bad acts, such as destroying evidence or tampering with witnesses, are prosecutable, he asserts. According to Barr, when the House Judiciary Committee drafted its articles of impeachment in July of 1974, the acts of obstruction alleged against Nixon were all such bad acts, or rather, not, I don't mean to say they were such bad acts. How bad were they? They were such bad acts that the mice were hunchback. I mean, they were all such bad acts, that is to say, ones that were of the kind that Barr believed could lead to prosecution, destroying evidence and tampering with witnesses. So in other words, according to Barr, when the House Judiciary Committee drafted its articles of impeachment in 1974, the acts of obstruction alleged against Nixon were all such bad acts involving impairment of evidence. Having explained that so carefully, I will now tell you that Holtzman says Barr is flat out wrong. We had numerous grounds for Nixon's impeachment for obstructing and impeding the investigation into the Watergate break-in that did not involve evidence impairment in the narrow way Barr defines the term. I will cite just two. One ground for impeachment was that Nixon ordered the firing of Watergate Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox, who was seeking White House tapes of presidential conversations. Whether the president had the power to fire Cox was irrelevant to the impeachment. Instead, the issue was that the president could not use his power to undermine or halt an investigation into his own possible criminal conduct or that of his aides. Although the committee explicitly was not bound by the obstruction of justice statute, it still viewed Cox's firing as an effort to squelch the criminal investigation. As such, it was an abuse of power and an obstruction and impeachable. It is worth noting that Trump's firing of FBI Director James B. Comey for insisting on continuing the Russia investigation seems to fall squarely under this precedent. Another example of Barr's revisionist history turns on Nixon's use of presidential pardons. One of the grounds for Nixon's impeachment was that he authorized offers of presidential pardons to the Watergate burglars to keep them from telling prosecutors about the involvement of higher-ups in the break-in. While no one contested the president's broad pardon powers, the committee voted to impeach Nixon for using those pardon powers to interfere with the criminal investigation. Trump seems to have similarly used those powers with regard to his campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, and is reported to have made or authorized pardon offers to other aides for purposes of gaining silence. Here again, Trump's conduct appears to replicate the impeachable misdeeds of Nixon. I guess strictly speaking, since he wasn't impeached, I don't know how helpful those articles of impeachment are as precedent. Not only was he not removed from office, he resigned before they could actually vote on the articles of impeachment. So there's not even really, it's not that those were officially ratified by the House in any way. Not that that would really make a huge amount of difference, since each new House can basically do what it wants on impeachment, and there's not that much in the way of limitation or evidentiary standards required of the House for adopting an impeachment resolution. It's whatever gets the votes is the bottom line on that. Anyway, it is of some interest, though, to take a look at what the House Judiciary Committee formulated, what they thought would fly, and they will give them credit for having a pretty good idea of what would and wouldn't have been capable of passing the House, at the very least. And probably with a good read on what would have passed muster in the Senate as well, although it would have been a little bit more of a crapshoot trying to get to 2/3 on that. As troubling as Barr's misguided and clumsy attempt to rewrite history is, his broader effort to elevate the president into a kind of unaccountable monarch. I see I've misemphasized all of that too, but I think you get the meaning here. That's the more troubling. Elevating the president into a kind of unaccountable monarch. This is part of a quiet Republican campaign over the past generation, very true, to locate the Constitution, in the Constitution, grounds for a powerful, quote, unitary executive, unquote, we've used the term before, who is virtually above the law. For Barr, presidential acts such as offering pardons or firing prosecutors cannot be prosecuted even if they have the effect of interfering with an investigation of the president. The reason, according to Barr, is that the president's underlying motives in offering the pardons or in firing the officials may not be scrutinized. Why can't they be scrutinized? For Barr, allowing such questioning undermines the very foundation of the presidency and the executive branch of government. But merely to describe Barr's position is to show its absurdity. Take the case of Nixon, who was named an unindicted co-conspirator by the Watergate grand jury during his presidency. Neither the presidency nor the country fell apart as a result. Moreover, there is nothing in the Constitution that puts the president beyond questioning or accountability. The framers knew how to prevent questioning when they wanted to. They provided that members of Congress shall not be questioned in any other place for any speech or debate in the House or Senate. True, good point. The Constitution is very plain that a president may be prosecuted for crimes committed while in office. Really? The Constitution doesn't hem that provision of accountability at all. There is no language restricting the scope of the prosecution or of the investigation.
Indeed, the framers wanted to make it crystal clear that even impeachment was not a substitute for prosecution. Barr's theory is derived from thin air, or maybe not even that. Barr's memo, his apparent meal ticket to the Attorney Generalship, is nothing more than a transparent effort to rewrite history to create a president who is above the law. That is not what the framers intended, and for that reason, he should not be confirmed. All right, well, he probably will be anyway, but that's a pretty good reason not to. If you were, the kind of person who was inclined to examine facts and historical patterns. But as I said, it's the Senate that's going to be doing the voting, and so I think you're out of luck on that front. Okay, let's see. Other things to address here, not quite bumping up against the break, but not a huge amount of time left. Let's see. Oh, let me update you on this little bit of news. And this was something that those of you who are able to stay tuned or tune into the podcast of Justice's West Coast. Why am I now blanking on what's the name of the program? Speakeasy. Where's the rest of it in my head? I can't. The West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Yes, there we go. I have to start speaking out loud, and then the words will start spilling out of my mouth. Finally, if you were able to tune in yesterday, this was covered. And as a matter of fact, here's the article that I asked him about that afterwards. As soon as I got off the air, I was like, are you kidding me? This really happened? I didn't realize, and I wish I had read that out in the preview yesterday. I read that the guy who put together the GoFundMe campaign to build the wall in the absence of federal funding, you remember all this, has a history as a scammer. And everybody, of course, had an eye on this thing because it was beginning to raise millions of dollars. And we were all wondering, is he just going to steal this money and just keep it for himself? Because they put up the goal of like $1 billion, which is ridiculous for a number of reasons, not the least of which is even $1 billion doesn't come close to building the wall. And two, it would be incredible. Change the nature of online fundraising entirely, I think, if you could get a GoFundMe campaign to $1 billion. Anyway, they didn't get anywhere near it. I think they made tens of millions pile up in virtual pledges anyway. So the news that I managed to blurt out before the end of the show yesterday was that he was shut down by GoFundMe and forced to refund the donations. Now, if you listened to the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy yesterday, great. Bear with me. For anybody who didn't, or who just wanted to hear me say, what? Holy crap, I didn't realize that was the case. And I really didn't realize it was the case until after the show. I read the rest of the preview, and I asked Justice, are you serious? Scam artist Brian Colfage finally owned up to what we knew from the start, report the folks at Crooks and Liars. He never intended for that money to go to a wall. It was just a way to build his email list for future fundraising. Okay, not a huge surprise there so far. But there's more, and I couldn't believe it. Now, where does this appear in the article? The fun part. Down at the bottom. So, let's see. Why don't we read through it, and then that'll probably coincide with our break when we get to the really exciting part, and you find out why I was like, what? Are you serious? Because this part so far is pretty obvious. You heard it here first. Caroli, thank you. That's who's telling us this story over at Crooks and Liars. You heard it here first. The wall scammer guy is a wall scammer. And we did hear that, didn't we? Regular readers of Crooks and Liars will not be at all surprised to discover that Brian Colfage, I don't know how he says that, having missed his $1 billion goal while moving the goalposts for his scammy crowd-funded wall, got shut down by GoFundMe for changing the terms. Remember what I said all of 3 weeks ago? Here's a reminder. She says, and her quote of herself, the bottom line here is that this is just another right-wing scam to harvest data on gullible people, promoted by Laura Ingraham and other Fox, quote, news personalities. I guess I would put personalities in quotes too, I guess. I reported that this is a scam to GoFundMe on December 21st. Oh, not just reporting to you about it being a scam, but reporting the scam to GoFundMe. But it took them some time to figure it out, apparently. However, when Kolfage edited the page to say he would direct all the funds to a non-profit organization not connected with any national park, although why you would use a national park, I don't know, but a fund managed by, get this, Chris Kobach and Eric Prince, of all people. Well, at that point, GoFundMe stepped in and ended it, requiring refunds to everyone who had donated through their site. Or alternatively, donors can opt in to the non-profit managed by, quote-unquote non-profit, managed by Kobach and Prince. What a team. That won't end well. Unfortunately, some people actually sent checks to Kolfage at the mailing address he provided. GoFundMe said they had no way to control things like that, so the wall scammer will end up with some cash out of the deal. Kolfage is a con artist who is regarded as a rising conservative star because he's a con artist. In conservative land, that means someone who can run multi-million-dollar scams on ordinary people who really can't spare money to be scammed, but are nevertheless wooed into thinking their donations make a difference. He's championed by the likes of Gary Sinise. Does he say Sinise? The actor, the actual actor, the famous guy, but I don't know if I've ever heard that name done correctly, who started a now defunct nonprofit in Hollywood called Friends of Abe for all the downtrodden conservative actors and entertainers to gather and commiserate with one another. Actually, the payoff is all these small donor addresses. Yes, that's the real prize and all this, and the personal data that goes along with it. Those are the prize which Kolfage has and can now leverage into cash by selling access to it. It's true, it's a gift that keeps on giving. Like I said, says Caroli, it was all a big data harvesting operation, just like all the other small donor scams conservatives run all the time. In this case, he was happy to blend the data harvesting with some Facebook propaganda pages. Between collecting all that yummy personal and geographic data and having the ability to micro-target ads on Facebook, he's now positioned to be a handy player in the upcoming elections. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Crazy schedule. Time to push one of the guys out the door here. So a little bit of rattling and, well, I don't know what else in the background, but ignore it. I actually think we're just about done with the Brian Kolfage story here, but it really was interesting to learn how did they, let's see, there's a little bit more here. Does it tell me anything about how it is that he ended up cooperating with Eric Prince, of all people? I mean, Kobach, I understand, is going to be out looking for a new grift. But Eric Prince has it running pretty good, so I'm curious how he got involved. For his part, Kolfage is still pushing the scam. Why not, right? On the GoFundMe page, he's appealing to donors to redirect their contributions to the Kobach Prince nonprofit. I still don't know which nonprofit that is. Maybe there's some info here I can follow up on. Anyway, it has no connection to the federal government, in case you were foolish enough to believe that. No way to direct the funds to a wall, and simply puts the data, the money, and the earnings on the money in the hands of scammers for unaccountable deeds. Sadly, people are still opting in. Here is his scam pitch. I wonder if it does the pitch page tell me anything about the name of the nonprofit that we're talking about. This goes back to the GoFundMe thing where they raised $20.5 million of the $1 billion goal. It's pretty sad. Does it list what's the name of the nonprofit that these two clowns have put together? Is this it? We Build the Wall Incorporated? Okay. Now a 501c4 charity. Brian Kolfage as president. Where's the... I don't see where the other two nuts come into the picture here, but, it's, well, that would be, it's a pretty, oh, here we are. The We Build the Wall team. Okay, so he's put together like a board of directors, and that is where Kobach and Prince come into the picture. Oh, David Clark is on the board. That's fun. Tom Tancredo is on the board as well. Interesting. And Tancredo, yeah, we haven't heard from him in a while. Sort of he came in around the time. He was a mirror image, really, in many ways, of Steve King, now being booted from his committee assignments. How interesting. Anyway, the scam pitch was basically that the federal government won't be able to accept our donations anytime soon. We're better equipped than our own government to use the donated funds to build an actual wall on the southern border. Why that would be the case, I do not know. Our highly experienced team is confident that we can complete significant segments of the wall in less time and for far less money than the federal government. That's interesting. It's always been the Republican argument that they could do much better than the government with private efforts. And our team strongly believes that we can complete our segments of the wall, as if they had any assigned to them, for less than half the government's estimated costs on a per-mile basis. Might even be true if you're not held to any standards of, quality construction whatsoever, and you're entirely unaccountable for the results. I guess it would be possible to build certain sections of the wall out of garbage and say you had done it at less than cost. All right. Caroli wraps things up here by saying you maybe think Eric Prince is rubbing his hands together at getting a giant chunk of those sweet, sweet millions to do a thing he cannot do. Yeah, me too. But in the end, there will be no crowd-funded wall because, say it with me now, Congress has to appropriate the money for a wall. Good luck with that, haters. Okay. I thought it was important to note the connection somehow of Chris Kobach to a new scam. And Eric Prince, what does he care? I guess he was just like, I don't know, you want to put my name on the list? Go for it. I don't care. I don't have to do anything, right? I don't know whether he's paying members of his board or not, but I imagine they all have their hands out. What else would they be interested in an effort like that? You say there's $20 million attached to it? Why wouldn't I get paid? All right. Let's see. A couple other articles sitting around burning a hole in things. Do we spend more time on Trump, Russia? Do we go in a different direction? There are a couple out there. I was intrigued by this article, though I'm a little tired of Max Boot, but he comes up an awful lot. But Max Boot and his jauntily tipped fedora here had a piece from Sunday, an opinion piece. Here are 18 reasons Trump could be a Russian asset. Is this a quick read or is this a long read? It's a medium length here, but I guess possibly a good recap of all the I don't think there's any serious skeptics still willing to tolerate listening to the program, but maybe we can run down this list and see if it makes us feel like we're adequately caught up here. On Friday, the New York Times reported that in the days after President Trump fired James Comey as FBI director, law enforcement officials became so concerned. How concerned were they? They were so concerned by the president's behavior that they began investigating whether he had been working on behalf of Russia against American interests. That investigation may well be continuing under the auspices of Special Counsel Robert Mueller. We don't know what Mueller has learned, but we can look at the key publicly available evidence that both supports and undercuts this explosive allegation. Here is some of the evidence suggesting Individual 1 could be a Russian asset. First, here, Trump has a long financial history with Russia. We know about this, as summarized by Jonathan Chait in an invaluable New York Magazine article from 2003 to 2017. People from the former USSR made 86 all-cash purchases, a red flag of potential money laundering, of Trump properties, totaling $109 million. In 2010, the private wealth division of Deutsche Bank also loaned him hundreds of millions of dollars. During the same period, it was laundering billions in Russian money. Russians make up a pretty disproportionate cross-section of a lot of our assets, said Donald Jr. in 2008. We don't rely on American banks. We have all the funding we need out of Russia, boasted Eric Trump in 2014. There's an awful lot of Russia talk before they knew it was going to get him in trouble, right? According to Trump attorney Michael Cohen's guilty plea of lying to Congress, Trump was even pursuing his dream of building a Trump Tower during the 2016 campaign with the help of a Vladimir Putin aide. These are the kinds of financial entanglements that intelligence services such as the FSB typically use to ensnare foreigners, and they could leave Trump vulnerable to blackmail. Okay, so far, Yeah, I knew that. Second one, Russians interfered, of course, with the 2016 U.S. election to help elect Trump president. Shouldn't really get credit for telling us that, but there it is. Trump encouraged the Russians to hack Hillary Clinton's emails. You remember all of that. Russia, if you're listening. That's a third. Fourth here, there were, according to the Moscow Project, 101 contacts. We reported that having come out the other day. The number was up over 100. 101 contacts between Trump's team and Russia-linked operatives. And the Trump team tried to cover up every single one of them. The most infamous of these contacts, the June 9th, 2016 meeting at Trump Tower. You remember that one. And Natalia Veselnitskaya et al. Next up, the Trump campaign, being full of individuals who are, spies. Carter Page, George Papadopoulos, Paul Manafort, Rick Gates, Michael Flynn, all with suspiciously close links to Moscow. Next, after that, Manafort was working for the campaign for free, yet heavily in debt to a Russian oligarch, who now admits to offering this Russian business partner, suspected of links to Russian intelligence, polling data that could have been used to target the Russian social media campaign on behalf of Trump. Then Roger Stone, in contact with Russian conduit WikiLeaks, reportedly knew in advance that the Russians had hacked Clinton's John Podesta's emails, Clinton campaign chair John Podesta's emails. Stone denies this, of course. Next up, once in office, Trump fired Comey to stop the investigation of the Russia thing. He told Lester Holt as much. And then bragged about having done so to the Russian ambassador and foreign minister while also sharing with them top secret information. Later, Trump fired Attorney General Jeff Sessions because he would not end the special counsel investigation that resulted after firing Comey. As lawfare editor Benjamin Wittes argues, the obstruction was the collusion. Yes. Also, as the rest of us kind of figured out, like the moment it happened. Trump has been effectively protecting the Russians by trying to impede the investigation of their attack on the United States. Yes, vague, but true. Trump has refused to consistently acknowledge that Russia interfered in the U.S. election or mobilize a government-wide effort to stop future interference. He's accepted Putin's protestations that the Russians did not meddle in the election over the high-confidence assessment of the U.S. intelligence community that they did. Like no other president, Trump attacks and undermines the Justice Department and the FBI, which he calls a cancer in our country. And he missed that one. Two institutions that stand on the front lines of combating Russian espionage and influence operations on the United States. Again, like no previous president, Trump attacks and undermines the European Union and NATO. He suggested that France should leave the EU and that the United States should leave NATO, reportedly saying NATO is as bad as NAFTA. The EU and NATO are the two major obstacles to Russian designs in Europe. He didn't say that, but that's actually the truth, right? But he might as well. He may say that later and not realize it. Okay, next up, Trump supports populist pro-Russian leaders in Europe, like Viktor Orban in Hungary and Marine Le Pen in France, just like the Russians do, coincidentally. Trump has praised Putin while trashing just about everyone else, from grade B Hollywood celebrities to leaders of allied nations. Trump even praised Putin for expelling U.S. diplomats. That's not usually the case, right? And notwithstanding instruction from his aides, do not congratulate, remember that one? Congratulated Putin on winning a rigged election. Trump was utterly supine in his meetings with Putin, principally in Hamburg and Helsinki. Even more suspicious, according to a Post article on Saturday, Trump has gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal details of his conversations with Putin, including on at least one occasion taking possession of the notes of his own interpreter and instructing the linguist not to discuss what had transpired with other administration officials. Very odd. Several officials said they were never able to get a reliable readout of the president's 2-hour meeting in Helsinki. Trump defends Russian invasion of Afghanistan now and repeats other pro-Russian talking points. That is very worrying. Trump is pulling U.S. troops out of Syria, handing that country over to Russia and its ally Iran. This is a very Max Bootian part of the list, I guess. Trump has effectively done nothing in response to the Russian attack on Ukrainian ships in international waters, thereby encouraging greater Russian aggression, although I can't promise you that any other American president would have done much more, to be honest. Trump is sowing chaos in government, most recently with a record-breaking partial government shutdown, and acting appointees in key posts, such as the Defense Department and Justice Department, thus furthering a Russian objective of undermining its chief adversary. And now that we've listed 18 reasons Trump could be a Russian asset, let's look at the exculpatory evidence. This page left intentionally blank. Get it? I can't think of anything, Max Boot says, that would exonerate Trump aside from the difficulty of grasping what once would have seemed unimaginable, that a president of the United States could actually have been compromised by a hostile foreign power. In his own defense, Trump claims he has been tougher on Russia than any other president. But literally in the next sentence, he says, getting along with Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing. When the United States actually has taken steps to get tough with Russia in the past 2 years, it has usually been the work of Congress, like the sanctions bill, or of Trump aides, like the action expelling 60 Russian diplomats. The Post reports that Trump was furious when his administration was portrayed as being tough on Russia. And NBC News reports that he instructed subordinates never to publicly discuss plans to sell weapons to Ukraine. This is hardly a beyond a reasonable doubt case that Trump is a Russian agent, certainly not in the way that Robert Hansen or Aldrich Ames were, maybe. But it is a strong circumstantial case that Trump is, as former acting CIA Director Michael Morrell and former CIA Director Michael Hayden warned during the 2016 campaign, an unwitting agent of the Russian Federation. Somebody came up with the formulation of him being a half-witting agent of the Russian Federation, too. I love that one. Or a useful fool who was manipulated by Moscow. Anyway, that's the two formulations of Morrell and Hayden on that. If Trump isn't actually a Russian agent, he's doing a pretty good imitation of one. Yeah, that's true. Not only does it perhaps fail as an open and shut, beyond a reasonable doubt case in criminal court, I guess this is as good a time as any to remind everybody that there's an awful lot of statutory law, which would be important in any criminal case, obviously, that gives the president an awful lot of leeway and that incorporates into it, from simpler, better times, a lot of presumption of legitimate motive, not only to conduct foreign policy more or less as a free agent, but to classify a good deal of what goes on there. And that you could easily imagine a president bargaining entirely in good faith and entirely with the interests of the United States in mind, and maybe not doing things exactly the same way, obviously, as Donald Trump, but keeping the proceedings classified, certainly, and insisting that translators present at the discussions likewise not reveal any of what they learned inside as a result of their work. That's not unusual by itself. And the move by some in Congress on the Democratic side, now that they are empowered to subpoena people, to bring the translator in for testimony is going to cause a tremendous amount of difficulty on that front. At a minimum, it does present a fairly serious ethical problem for the translators. They, professionally speaking, would have great difficulty in being asked to testify about classified or even just confidential meetings for any client, the president or anyone, for which they were doing translating. I mean, they're very frequently called upon to, in their role as translators, come into possession of very private information, and for whoever they're working with. And the whole idea would be that they could be trusted professionally not to disclose it. I don't think they have any, I don't know, maybe there is something out there. I'm not familiar enough with current evidentiary practice to know whether there's any sort of professional exemption for translators, but you could easily see one being constructed, certainly if they're operating in an area that could be reasonably construed as covering issues of national security primarily. Anyway, what I'm saying is there will be great difficulty in convincing the professional organizations, lawyers, courts in general, that there's a real right to get at this information through the translator anyway. I would say maybe the best crack you have at getting that done would be to argue to the courts that if there were any presumption against the ability to compel a translator to testify, that you would perhaps, I think you should be, anything that stands as a bar, you should set out a test to see if there's any way you could overcome this bar in some sort of extreme or exigent circumstances. I would say maybe a good argument might be that ordinarily there are other safeguards for this kind of information being becoming known and being vetted for its propriety in other levels of government. Like, for instance, ordinarily, you don't have to, you don't act to keep your own Secretary of State or Vice President or anybody else out of the loop with respect to what has been discussed. And of course, even if you do, at that point, there's still some possibility that in some set number of years that the release of your presidential records and presidential papers will make plain for the record of history what happened. But if there's, in addition to unprecedented secrecy and no checks and balances whatsoever, either from inside the executive branch or elsewhere in the government, no one is in a position to put the brakes on what this president is doing with Putin and what he's discussing with Putin and other Russians. And there's no possibility of a historical record even being developed after the fact. Then you're really, you're talking about some unique situation here, and it might be one situation in which a court might be willing to compel testimony from a translator who might otherwise be let off the hook on something like this. But because this president, through his own actions, has insisted on refusing to comply with ordinary presidential record keeping, refusing to comply with the ordinary chain of, let's say, of distribution of even highly classified information among the national security apparatus, and that all of the statutes that would ordinarily encourage courts to give deference to the president also assume compliance with a number of other national security checks and balances and historical record checks and balances that are being ignored here. And you should probably make, I would suggest to the courts that you should probably make any decisions about whether or not the standards of deference ought to be complied with in the context of whether or not there's any evidence that any of the other standards, including checks and balances inside and outside the executive branch, are being complied with. If none of those are being complied with, then most of the framework on which the deference to the president stands can no longer stand and ought no longer to be part of your calculus in making this decision. So there you go. From that mark back to where we started this discussion. The last 5 minutes or so, probably overstating the case, last 3 minutes or so. Take that with you on your way to court and see if you make any headway with that one. We'll have to develop that argument as time goes on. All right, let's see. Not quite time for our third break, bringing us into the final segment. But let's see. A few more things and then maybe a shift of direction. And it occurs to me that I might have to step away from the microphone here and see if I can check in on the second of our departures here and whether or not he's even awake and going to get out the door in time. Time's running out. Let's see. So I think I might have, what is this? I'll have to see what I have here by way of pre-recorded segments. There are a couple sitting in my soundboard, but I'm now unsure, it occurs to me, of how old are these things. Anyway, before we take that break, I want to put on, we'll put on the record, notice that this is coming. This might be something we want to bring up with Joan tomorrow. I have a piece from Politico from last week. End of last week, Friday of last week, the 11th, right? Trump wants to bypass Congress. This is always the case. But on what? On Medicaid plan. Yeah, this one has sort of snuck up on me. I've seen it for the last couple of days. We haven't discussed it. Block grants for states. A long-time pipe dream for these guys. Block grants for states would achieve conservative dream on health program for poor. Rachana Pradhan and Dan Diamond teaming up for this piece again for Politico. The Trump administration is quietly devising a plan. Can't believe they're doing it quietly. Bypassing Congress to give block grants to states for Medicaid, achieving a long-standing conservative dream of reining in spending. Yeah, right. On the health care safety net for the poor. That I believe. 3 administration sources say the Trump administration is drawing up guidelines on what could be a major overhaul of Medicaid in some states. Instead of the traditional open-ended entitlement, states would get spending limits along with more flexibility to run the low-income health program that serves nearly 75 million Americans, from poor children to disabled people to impoverished seniors in nursing homes. Okay. So how exactly would this work here? Let's see if I can continue on with this. Capping spending could mean fewer low-income people getting covered, or state-designated cutbacks in health benefits, although proponents of block grants argue that states would be able to spend the money smarter with fewer federal strings attached. No real evidence of that, but aware of the political sensitivity, the administration has been deliberating and refining the plan for weeks, hoping to advance an idea that Republicans, since the Reagan era, have been unsuccessfully championed in Congress against stiff opposition from Democrats and patient advocates. During the Obamacare repeal debate in 2017, Republican proposals to cap and shrink federal Medicaid spending helped galvanize public opposition, with projections showing millions would be forced off coverage. So trying it again, eh? In addition to potential legal obstacles presented by moving forward without Congress, you think, an administration effort could face strong opposition from newly empowered House Democrats who vowed to investigate the administration's health care moves. For instance, hell no, Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania wrote on Twitter on Friday evening, vowing to oppose the administration's block grant plan through legislation in the courts, holding up administration nominees, literally every means that a U.S. senator has. You can see why they'll want to go around that then. The administration's plan remains a work in progress, and sources said the scope is still unclear. It's not yet known whether CMS would encourage states to seek strict block grants or softer spending caps, or if new limits could apply to all Medicaid populations, including nursing home patients, or just a smaller subset like working-age adults. A spokesperson for CMS did not comment on the administration's plans, but indicated support for the concept of block grants. Let's see. So what's the mechanism here? I can't tell exactly. The administration wants to let states use waivers to reshape their Medicaid programs, but the effort could face legal challenges in the courts. Waivers approved by the Trump administration to allow the first ever Medicaid work requirements for some enrollees, for example, already being challenged in 2 states. Also complicating the administration's push, the newfound popularity of Medicaid. Newfound? Really? Okay, sure. Which has grown to cover about 1 in 5 Americans. Oh, I see what you mean. Voters in 3 Republican-led states in November approved ballot measures to expand Medicaid, which has been adopted by 2/3 of the states. Newly elected Democratic governors in Kansas and Wisconsin are pushing their Republican-led legislatures to expand Medicaid this year. Let's see. So Administrator Verma here of CMS has been trying to insert block grant language into federal guidance for months, but has encountered heavy scrutiny from agency lawyers. All right. Well, we'll encounter it on our way back in. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption, though it's still aimed at saying thank you to all of you who are supporters of the show. We've made a lot of progress. When we first started this campaign, fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners were donating to help keep us on the air, and now that's down to about 1 in 15, but we've got a long way to go. Remember, it won't take much. Our average monthly donation is currently about $7, for which you're getting 2 hours of great news and entertainment 5 days a week. What's that, 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. But as a wage, well, I think Democrats would be against that. But if we all put our 70 cents together, or even half of us, that'd really be something. And my kids could go to college. Now, that's not all on you, but remember, patreon.com, Patreon.com, is there to make it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X, or David Waldman, or Kagro in the Morning, or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right there where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your continuing support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Woo, and let's see, do we want to pick up with more about these block grants? I'm still running around trying to get everybody all together and out the door. We may fail on this last front, but the good news is if we totally fail and miss the bus on Sun number 2 on a 2-hour delay, the show is almost over by the time that happens, and then I guess I could drive them to school. Ordinarily a big problem, because it usually happens right before the show. But we'll see how we do on this one. Let's see. Verma had, we left off, and I don't think, I skipped one of the paragraphs about explaining exactly who Verma is. And I don't think I even got to explaining what CMS is, although I know we've discussed the agency before. But I'm actually looking through the piece here, and I think that they did the same thing, and they skip it and don't actually discuss it. But Seema Verma is the administrator of CMS, which is the something or other, that I can't even remember the acronym, that covers or administers Medicaid here, but they just jump right to the CMS designation in the article here. So where were we when we left off? Yes, CMS hoping to make an announcement early this year. Still not much information about the actual mechanism here. Just, I guess, presidential waivers of some kind or executive orders. It's still not entirely clear what kind of mechanism we're using. Verma has been trying to insert block grant language into federal guidance for months, but has encountered the heavy scrutiny of agency lawyers, right? She mentioned interest in using her agency's authority to pursue block grants during a meeting with state Medicaid directors in the fall, but did not provide details, said 2 individuals who attended. There is some precedent for the federal government capping its spending on the entitlement program. George W. Bush's health department approved Medicaid spending caps in Rhode Island and Vermont that would have made the states responsible for all costs over defined limits. However, those spending caps were set so high that there was never any risk of the states blowing through them. In recent years, governors have complained about the rising costs of Medicaid, eating up a bigger share of their budgets. States jointly finance the program with the federal government, on which on average covers 60% of the cost though the federal government typically shoulders more of the burden in poorer states. The federal government covers a much higher share of the cost for Medicaid enrollees covered by the Obamacare expansion as well. An official from a conservative state, you can't even say which state, speaking on background to discuss an effort not yet public, said states would consider a block grant as long as the federal government's guidance isn't overly prescriptive. They're going to look that gift horse in the mouth after all. CMS hoping to make an announcement early this year, but it could be further delayed 2 weeks, who knows? We'll see what happens. By legal review, which has already been slowed by the prolonged government shutdown. So just another of the bits of fallout from the shutdown. There is no direct provision of authority to waive the way that the federal government pays the states, though, says Joe Antos of the American Enterprise Institute, a right-leaning think tank, in case you need reminding. However, that doesn't mean you can't try to have some of the effects that people that like block grants would like to see in terms of encouraging states to be more prudent with the way that they spend money. I wouldn't be surprised in the end to see a presidential proclamation or some sort of agency directive encouraging states to be more prudent and then claiming success as having block granted the money, even though nothing actually changed. It would end up, I guess, essentially, my interest in this is, does this end up being another thing that gets announced as a program that's being executed or guidance that's being issued, and then no paperwork is actually ever produced and nothing ever happens, but then Trump runs around claiming it as a policy victory? Keep an eye on it, I guess, in that case. Let's see. Here's we have some more breaking news in our now back to us KITM hashtag. Now that I've filtered it properly, I think Kate Sherrill says, here's the tweet from Dale Ho. Breaking, we won. Federal court blocks Trump administration from adding citizenship question to the census. There we go. That was a big case. Details to come. We'll have to add that one to the "you're really good at getting stuff done" or whatever hashtag dotard ongoing Twitter thread. Just as soon as the Hill reports on it. I like using their layout for those things. Okay, let's see. Other news of interest that we can use in the last block. Let's pick this up. There have been a couple of interesting gun news items over the last couple of days. Not gun fail items per se, although there's definitely some gun fail involved, but some what looks like the result of some long-term reporting on the gun situation in general in this country. Let's see. I'm reminded by it by a message that I got from Paula Apanis, a Paula writer, who sent me this article in the Washington Monthly here. Let's see. William V. Glastris Jr., who wrote a piece called "A Real Long-Term Solution to Gun Violence." Well, that would be nice. To address one of America's deadliest problems, start by cornering the market, which seemed like an interesting prospect. However, for whatever reason, this article just does not want to scroll. So I'm going to have to reload it and see if it'll scroll down this way. Okay, we can get some sense of how long this thing is. That could eat up the rest of the show. But let me, we'll hold on to this one. And there's also another piece that I wanted to bring up. There's a couple of them. And let me see. Do I have them both handy is the question. One came up, I don't know. I'm going to say about a week and a half ago. That was of some interest. And I know I put it aside here somewhere. Yeah. And then there was a second one. I'm going to have to scroll around a little bit more to try and find. But this one caught my attention. Let's see, back on January 8th. Author here is Jay Willis, writing in GQ, which I wasn't expecting as a source, but I think it cropped up as a suggestion somewhere. And I just thought it was an interesting, and it's a long read. It says right here on the top of the page, a long read, so we're probably not going to get through it all. When you give a teacher a gun. Interesting. So the premise here, and I guess we'll read this one paragraph here. The question is no longer, should we arm teachers? I mean, it really is a question, but we've blown past it. Now it's, how many armed teachers are already out there? The premise of the article, we flew down to Ohio. Down to Ohio. From where? To embed with the men and women behind faster saves lives. Now that's an acronym of some kind. It's all caps. FASTER, F-A-S-T-E-R, saves lives. A group that has trained thousands of teachers from all across the country how to shoot to kill. And you can see immediately how, the problems that can arise with this. There are people who insist that there are no such problems, but you can see how the problems would arise. It's pretty easy to understand. There was reporting, though, also, I'm sure it was probably out of Florida or Texas, right? Which one? Where did this come from? Am I going to be able to find this thing? Let me scan around. There was a story about one school that had a program to arm. They were arming the coaches as opposed to the teachers. In some cases, I assume there's overlap as teachers who coach, but they were arming their coaches and who knows who else in an effort to protect the students from, maybe one day there would be a mass shooting and I'd be the ninja that would bullseye the guy, the whole premise of that thing. And that they had encountered a number of issues that I suppose they would view as unanticipated, but the rest of us would have anticipated. These school districts tried to arm coaches. It's harder than it sounds. A piece written by appearing in the Miami Herald, end of or over the weekend, I guess the 13th. That was Saturday. Why this is not just coming up. It's interesting the way I have to go through 10 clicks to get to this stuff. Somebody's harvesting something off of me here. This wasn't the iteration that I saw originally, I don't think. So now I'm on my third click to try to get to the story I originally saw and somehow didn't put aside. But one of the key takeaways from this crazy story was that one of the teachers, or one of the coaches that they armed, I guess when I say they armed them, it's like they really actually went out there and said, here, we'll give you a gun and maybe sort of kind of some training. One of these guys pawned the gun. Like actually and he did it multiple times. They kept arming him and he kept pawning the guns for cash. Like that I did not anticipate. Yeah, here's the iteration I found the one I was looking for. The Tampa Bay Times. I recognize it by the photo that they were running with the piece here. These school districts tried to arm coaches. It's harder than it sounds. More than a third of the school systems had problems getting the controversial program off the ground. That does sound like a big fail rate for guns in the schools. Let's see. How much of this can we get through? I don't really know, but I wanted to just sort of bring it to your attention. This may be the one we want to start with, and perhaps we can save the more intriguing, thinky piece that Paula sent us for another day later this week. Catherine Campione, Vincent McDonald, and Christina Morales teaming up on this piece after, and again, Tampa Bay Times, where I found this one. After the deadly shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in February, Brevard County Schools Assistant Superintendent Matt Reed faced a challenge unlike any in his career. His team had to find, hire, and train more than 24 new employees to carry firearms on school campuses and protect students in the event of a school shooter. They had less than 6 months. The district missed the deadline. By the way, can you imagine handing school administrators out of nowhere the task of, you have to basically train a police force or armed forces to operate within a school setting where, any mistake caps a kid. But hey, by the way, we're cutting your salary. Thank you very much. Even though school started in August, it was really another month and a half after school started that we were ready, Reed said. So after the shooting in February last school year, they were trying to get it in place for the beginning of the next school year and just couldn't make it. Brevard isn't the only school system to have trouble complying with a new state law that allows certain employees to be armed, according to an examination of how the program is being implemented across the state by Tampa Bay Times and University of Florida student journalists. Some small districts struggled to recruit enough so-called guardians to keep their schools safe, Levy County launched a program only to have nobody apply for weeks. We haven't talked about that possibility yet. Others had trouble with the guardians they hired. In Duval County, a school safety assistant was arrested for pawning a service weapon issued to him by the school district. At least they arrested him. In Hillsborough, a school security deputy resigned after exposing students to pepper spray. It's not the worst thing he could have exposed them to, I suppose. The problems have piled up, largely unnoticed, even as the concept of vastly expanding the controversial program has gathered momentum. People are really into this, mostly because they sell guns. Last month, the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Commission recommended the legislature allow teachers to participate, saying the current law is too restrictive to keep kids safe. We need to have more guns out there in order to have more safety. You know, they actually believe this. The Coach Aaron Feis School Guardian Program currently allows for certain school district employees who are not classroom teachers to carry concealed weapons on campus. School guardians cannot make arrests, but they are expected to protect students in the case of an active shooter. You can't arrest, but you can kill. There you go. The program was created last year as part of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Act, which aimed to increase school security in the wake of the shooting in Parkland. Florida school boards were required to either put a sworn law enforcement officer or a guardian on every campus. The legislature gave them until the start of the school year to comply. I love that one. That's a great move by the legislature. You school people figure it out. You're the ones who should be responsible for this stuff. All right. Let me hang on. I got to introduce the new segment on the show called Is Everything Okay for Getting Your Lunch Packed? Yes, okay, so the thumbs up. One branch of Congress is ready to go. I'm disguising the information. All right, everything's good? You got it all? All right, so good news. It is now live time, 10:45, so time for you to be ready to go. And, all right, America is prepared and has lemonade and mozzarella cheese snacks, right? Pineapple today, fresh pineapple. Okay, very good. I'm glad everybody's on board for that. We'll see. Hey, America, see you later after school. Have a good day. All right. Now, back to our other previously scheduled program of discussing the issue of arming teachers and other school personnel. The idea of putting more guns on elementary and secondary school campuses has transfixed the state and the nation. President Donald Trump tweeted his support for arming teachers last year. In Broward County, where the shooting took place, the concept sparked protests. School board members first voted against arming school personnel, then conceded they couldn't afford to comply with the law any other way. I mean, it's a dumb law, but there it is. Florida. I was going to give you a dumb one from the start. Journalists at the University of Florida participating in a data reporting class under the direction of Times editors reviewed news clips from around the state and reached out to many of the school districts that opted to use guardians in their traditional schools. More than a third of the 24 districts had problems in the program's first few months. Pinellas and Pasco did not have obvious issues. Hernando did not participate. I didn't realize there was an opt-out. And Brevard, pushback from the community held up the process, Reed said. The sheriffs didn't want to survey the community and hold town hall meetings on the subject, in part because that would have meant that the security specialists or the guardians, whatever we choose, would not have been trained by the first day of school, he said. Oh, are the cops saying they didn't want to hold town hall meetings because then they wouldn't be able to finish the training for the guardians in time? That's a pretty lame excuse. I'm sure the police spokesperson was totally involved in the training, right? The Okeechobee School Board decided to participate in June, but the Okeechobee Sheriff's Office won't begin training guardians until January of 2019, Sergeant Michael Hazeleaf said. Well, get it underway, guys. It's January 2019 right now. Hazeleaf said training 6 to 10 volunteers would be challenging because of the high standards set in the law. Again, you know, the legislature says, do it and do it really, really strongly, and then leaves it at that. And everybody is scrambling to figure out what that's supposed to mean. We have that many people who are interested, he said. Out of that, I doubt that we'll have a high rate of success. I guess We have that many people who are interested. See, I would think that might have been that we don't have that many people who are interested. And out of that, I wouldn't get a high success rate. Okay. The Lafayette County School District also began the year without any guardians. Sheriff Brian Lamb, not the C-SPAN host. That was the guy's name, right? Brian Lamb. I think I couldn't think of that the other day. By January, and again, Lafayette County, few volunteers were nearing the end of the training process, but none were active in schools. It's going to be hard for us to get it all completed, Lamb said. But of course, here they are, no pun intended, under the gun of a legislative diktat that there be armed. Look, I don't care if they're trained or not. We want those guns in those schools near the kids. You understand me? And I don't know if anybody actually interpreted it that way. And they probably chose to miss the deadline instead. And then, of course, if they were to train people more thoroughly and then put them in there but still have an accident, the investigative committees would say, you've had problems with this from the start, haven't you? You missed all the deadlines. You're an incapable administrator. It's your fault. I was just trying to make things safer. Safer? What? With training? How dare you? Anyway, let's see. Levy County had no applicants at the start of October. Assistant Superintendent John Lott said, that's interesting. John Lott is the superintendent of schools there. Not the John Lott who's the lying gun advocate, but a totally different one. Asked in January if anyone had applied, Lott would not give an answer, citing security risks. Interesting. You don't want the bad guys to know whether you've got 100 guardians or one, Lott said. That sounds like the regular John Lott, doesn't it? You have no applicants in October. In January, you still got no applicants? I'm not saying, because we don't want anybody to know whether we've got 100 or one or none. That answer is a none. Duval County faced a different kind of challenge. Several parents sued the school district in November, claiming that it is illegal for school safety assistants to carry weapons on school grounds. The school board adopted a program to hire inadequately trained individuals who are not law enforcement officers to carry guns while policing public schools, the parents wrote. 3 nonprofit organizations, the League of Women Voters, the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, and the Southern Poverty Law Center, what a team, that is interesting, joined the lawsuit, which calls for the removal of firearms from the safety assistant's possession. Or you could just have them sell them, right? Duval County Schools spokesman Tracy Pierce declined to comment on the litigation. The school safety assistants were required to undergo 200 hours of training, including firearms courses. Including? Really? You don't say. Including firearms courses. Okay. I was going to say, it's rather impressive to require 200 hours of firearms training. It's pretty serious. All right. It was 1 hour of firearms training, 199 hours of what kind of training? I don't know. I don't know what the mix is, including firearms courses. Wow. Thanks. What a concession. All right. So that's in Jacksonville Sheriff's Office would have to provide that training, according to the Duval County Public Schools website. In Manatee County, Guardian John Cinque I'm giving you the Italian-ish pronunciation of Cinque. There are some people who say Cinque or Cinque, but it's Cinque. Was fired from his duties at Kinnan Elementary School in Sarasota after the Bradenton Herald unearthed a series of controversial posts on his Facebook page. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Yeah, oh, you're a Klansman Nazi? Here's a gun. March around with the kids. Fantastic. What sort of things are on his Facebook page? Let's see. One post displayed a SWAT helmet with a bullet hole, according to a district investigatory report. The caption, citizens may resist unlawful arrest to the point of taking an arresting officer's life if necessary. Yikes. That was attributed, by the way, that is actual quote. It was portrayed as an actual quote. It was attributed in the post to an 1893 court case in the Indiana Supreme Court. The quotation, however, does not appear in the ruling, and so fake news. Cinque told the school district investigators that he, quote, stood by his beliefs, but said he was not a right-wing extremist. He could not be reached for comment for this report. Manatee County School District Attorney Mitchell Teitelbaum declined to discuss Cinque's case in further detail, but said guardians were trained and advised on social media in advance. Part of your 200 hours, I guess. District officials were taking a closer look at the Guardian's social media accounts, he added. In Hillsborough County, a school deputy, a security deputy, resigned after exposing several Lopez Elementary students to pepper spray, according to the county sheriff's office. Oops, accidental discharge of pepper spray. One student taken to the school nurse had to be treated with water and ice. The report said, didn't kill anybody, thank God. The district is using contracted deputies until it can hire and train more people to add to its armed security team. One of those deputies, Patricia Parker, sprayed the chemical agent into a napkin to show it to 4 students who were curious about the gear on her belt. Oh, well, who could blame them, right? And who could have predicted that kids would become curious about the gear on their belt, like a gun or whatever? Can't show you this one, but this is pepper spray. Really? What's that like? Here. Spray it into a napkin. Fine. I'm sure it'll all work out. The students sat nearby and came into contact with the spray, and, stuff's pretty powerful. Don't deploy it. What is that? How does that work? Oh, let me show you. I'll shoot a napkin. Idiot. Hillsborough County Public Schools Security Services Chief John Newman said the chemical spray doesn't know a good guy or a bad guy. It comes out in a big splat, and, well, that splat will have collateral contamination in that classroom, he said. Parker, 56, began working with the sheriff's office in May of 1990 and retired from service in 2015, rehired in July as a school security deputy, and resigned after the incident. She could not be reached for comment. She was choking on pepper spray. That deputy retired that day, knowing she had not performed to the standard we expect. That is not a toy, and she knew that. Gosh, that's what people say about guns. A new deputy was put into school when Parker resigned. Across the state, Duval County School Safety Assistant James Richard Johnson was arrested for pawning a service weapon issued to him by the school district 2 separate times, records show. He used the Glock handgun for collateral to borrow $300 in August, records show, and then, so he bought the gun back and then did it again on October 5th, this time for $230. Johnson could not be reached for comment. He resigned in October. Danielle Thomas, the legislation chairwoman for the Florida PTA, said her organization had worried problems like this might arise if the state approved a school guardian program. The PTA wanted only sworn law enforcement officers on campuses, she said. Thomas said she hopes to see the state lawmakers consider changes to the guardian program when the legislative session begins in March. We don't want to necessarily be lenient on timelines, she said, but we understand that not everything can be done in a really short time frame if we want to do this and do it well. Well, too bad. You want to do it or you want to do it well. Which is it going to be? Okay. Interesting. It's interesting what people think of as unanticipated problems sometimes. All right. And perhaps we will spend some time maybe Thursday or Friday. Friday's always a good long read day on this piece that Paula sent us, but I'll include it in the roundup in case you want to read up on it earlier and or I failed to deliver on this, because who knows what might develop during the day before we get to return to the subject. But very interesting. It certainly holds out the promise of being interesting sounding, using some sort of market mechanism to convince gun owners to somehow what? I don't know exactly what sort of safety measure is being proposed here, but always an interesting prospect to use free market mechanisms to convince gun owners to do something they might not otherwise be willing to do, just because it's always fun. It will create some cognitive dissonance for a lot of those people who are strong believers both in gun rights and free market economics, and yet will have to be forced to choose one over the other, even though in all likelihood there would be no rights surrendered in that scheme. But, it doesn't really matter whether or not you're really surrendering rights for gun nuts to complain that that's the case. Recall that there are still gun nuts out there who think that mandatory EPA regulations or EPA regulations mandating lead abatement programs in indoor shooting ranges to keep the people who use the shooting range and who work in the shooting range from becoming poisoned by the toxic lead dust that's in there is a violation of the Second Amendment. It's really a backdoor to closing down our shooting range and thereby infringing on our Second Amendment rights, even though the range next door is still open and we could always go there. Or sometimes we close this place and the staff goes home. That's not an infringement on people's Second Amendment rights because they can't shoot on 3 in the morning on Sunday. The range is closed. All right, well, whatever. We don't need to remind you how crazy these people are. What we really need to do is wrap the show up and let you know what's coming up on that program known as the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Everybody knows the name of this program. Coming up next today, Trump already has lots of taxpayer money for his vanity wall, but he won't spend it. A good reminder there. A U.S. military translator and his family were detained at George Bush International Airport in Houston, Texas, after their visas were canceled mid-air. And there's more I can try and squeeze in after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, let's get down to the bottom here. This is the part I usually miss in these announcements. Trump mocks immigrants for showing up to their court dates. Why? And Mike Pence, along with Mike Pompeo, belong to a doomsday cult. Did you know that? And maybe trying to bring on the apocalypse. I think we've heard hints about that before. It'll be interesting to hear what Justice has us for that next.